second hour of Stein Online on CompuServe Interactive Radio on our very special program dedicated to the Titanic today. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, hi there, George.
How are you?
Okay, this is George Tulloch. He is the president of RMS Titanic. He has been down to the Titanic a number of times. And George, the first thing that came to my mind is you're a kid in school, in elementary school, and the teacher has everybody get up in front of the class and say, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they're getting up saying the typical things. And you get up there and say, I want to explore the Titanic.
Yeah, it is a far stretch. It really is, Eliot.
How did this happen for you? When did your interest become something that made you step out of the shadow of this kind of thing to actually pursue it?
Well, I think, very simply said, it was a reaction to the fact that these objects were going to be recovered and sold. And I do love history, and so it was my obligation to participate and try to change that, or to just pass it and let someone else do it. And it seemed like the right thing to do at the time.
One of the questions that keeps popping up today in our Living History Forum, where we are pulling questions for the interview today on CompuServe, Go History, if you want to join us there, is that people want to know about the rights. What happens in this kind of case when a ship goes down that is not, it's not anywhere near the port of the country that it originated from? Who obtains the rights? How are these rights transferred? They want you to explain this. And who owns the rights to the possessions that are found on the particular salvage?
The way that salvage law over the centuries has developed is a logical way to argue out the process of who owns a ship and who owns the belongings on the ship. If you consider the people involved, someone goes out on a voyage and has a valuable painting as that person crosses the sea, and the ship sinks, and the painting sinks with the ship. The person, if they survive, or their heirs, make a claim for that painting if it is insured. The insurance company pays off the loss to the passenger or his heirs or her heirs, and then the insurance company owns the right to that painting. If the person is uninsured, then it's an uninsured loss, and the person retains ownership to that painting. At the point that the ship is recovered and that painting is recovered, that painting still belongs to that passenger or their heirs. It is not left their ownership. The law provides that the person who provides the salvage or recovery work is entitled to a fair return of payment for services rendered to save that piece, and salvage law is that mechanism that provides for the owner of the property and the person providing the service to return that property get together and recompense the labor provided and protect the property owner involved. When you talk about the ship itself and someone has abandoned it as property, and so it's an abandoned wreck, and they have abandoned ownership to it, then it becomes an issue of the person who goes out and recovers the wreck or works on recovering the wreck and demonstrates that to a court of law under admiralty law. They can lay claim to that ship because it's been abandoned. But a passenger never abandoned their property. They were removed from their property unwillingly. When the personal belongings, such as the painting, are recovered, they have to have a forum, a courtroom, a process a notification whereby people who may have property have fair notice and an opportunity to review what may be theirs and lay claim to that, and step up and say, that was my painting. And that's the normal process of admiralty law that's developed over 400 years, derivative from English law, and it's known as admiralty law, and it's applied, except for a local custom, around the world, pretty much the same way. In our jurisdiction, perhaps it's 30 days notice that a person has to stake their claim to a piece of property. In France, it might be they have 90 days. The method of notification might be different, one jurisdiction to another, but principally every country is the same.
George Tulloch joins us. He's the president of RMS Titanic. They have done expeditions down to the Titanic. We're going to find out about a lot of fascinating things today. That pretty much gives us an idea, George, about that, because people were wondering, well, who can make the claim on this kind of thing? I want to get into with you immediately your knowledge of, as far as you know, when was there the first implementation of a desire to want to find the Titanic, to want to go down there, see if they can find anything on it? How far back does it go, or does it?
You mean with our culture?
In anybody, any country, anybody since it went down?
It was immediate, Eliot.
Okay.
Immediately, a company was retained by the Astors, who had feared for the loss of the body of John Jacob Astor. And immediately upon the news of the sinking, the Guggenheims and the Astors both took steps to consider salvaging the wreck. One method that was considered because of its depth was explosives to create an explosion that would, if his body was trapped down there, to send it up. It was very difficult to consider how to do that in 1912, and the two families were so told. However, within days, Mr. Astor's body was recovered, and that first initial effort was abandoned. But after that, with every decade, came more and more curious ideas of how to recover the Titanic and how to bring it up to the surface with ping pong balls or nitrogen gas. And the popular mechanics through the years, starting right in the teens, right through the 50s, showed a number of different ingenious ideas. The
ping pong ball theory, it almost seems a little bit on the absurd side.
It is. Some of them have developed into. There's a Danish company who constantly is in touch with us and has patented glass balls, which is kind of like Benthos uses throughout the world for suspended equipment in the ocean, because glass does well in the deep ocean and in the shallow ocean, glass spheres. So as one bizarre idea comes along, practical men continue to try to improve it. But the real turning point was deep ocean technology developed through titanium and through the development of a manned submersible in the mid-'80s that could actually reach that depth.
What was the depth of the Titanic?
12,470 feet.
And I'm just trying to get some numbers here so people have a perspective. What is the furthest that man has ever gone down in some kind of submergible before that?
We can go down to 20,000 feet in the present submersibles, although we have gone down in a bathysphere, or basically just a bell of metal, to the depth of 37,000 feet.
And what about men that just have sophisticated oxygen tanks themselves? What is the depth on that?
It's really 200 feet with mixed gases. Men go down deeper than that, but not much deeper and with great danger.
Okay, that gives us a visual idea of what has happened here. But it was the 1980s that really the technology developed at that time that allowed people to at least think that maybe they can get down there and start doing some actual salvaging.
Applying tools to a wreck in the deep ocean.
We are talking to George Tulloch, president of RMS Titanic. Tell us a little bit about your company, if you would.
RMS Titanic is a New York-based company organized in the 80s to conclude the work of IFREMER, the Institut Français, French Institute for the Research and Exploration of the Sea, La Mer, IFREMER, IFREMER, who, in discovering the wreck in 1985, realized that without a plan in place to protect this wreck and the objects, wanted to conclude this so that these objects, rather than being lost to the auction block, ended up in a public collection that would be available for exhibition.
We're talking to George Tulloch. Now, I'm going to pull up some questions here from the Living History Forum on CompuServe. That's Go History. We're meeting in the conference room called History, 1837 to 1913. Somebody has a good general question for you, which is essentially they want to know what is the most interesting thing that you have found down there.
The most interesting object that I believe, on a personal level for me, is the letters and personal papers of Howard Irwin, because there's so many, and because they have, through their content, shown me what Howard Irwin was like and what his girlfriend was like, and it's been such a powerful experience that I feel very much like, in a sense, I know these people, and yet they're both dead and they're both gone, and yet in a sense they're alive again because of this paper that has sat on the bottom of the ocean for 82 years.
How could paper survive? Ink back in 1912. We're talking about ink was used they used those feather pens, right, and quills.
Yeah, and good fountain pens. They had good fountain pens, like a good ink pen, but they also used a great deal of pencil.
Okay, how could this paper not have been disintegrated, even if it was in a locker or a trunk? How could it not have decayed by now?
As it was put in suitcases and compressed, we would get some ink bleed and some ink fade. Pencil, as I said, is much stronger, and typewriter is fine. It's pretty good, but they are readable, and we freeze them as soon as the conservation team on the surface, as soon as they leave the surface and get to the conservation team, they take them through fresh water and right to freezing. And they perform miracles in France with this paper. I'm not going to pretend to qualify to take you through that whole process, other than what is blackened is electrified, and through electricity they remove the stains, and through freezing they remove the water, and then they literally iron this paper smooth, clean again. And it's almost like dry cleaning. I mean, it's there, and it's a miracle. Even a newspaper, Eliot. We have a newspaper from April 9th that a passenger threw in his luggage that the scientists, over 3 months, I watched some of their work, pieced together with long forceps like a burned patient's skin, and have returned that front page to where it's totally readable.
The letters that you personally found very rewarding, who was this man? Was he from aristocracy? Was he just a common man? Who was he?
A very common man. He was a 25-year-old young fellow, a New Yorker from Buffalo, who was the chum of a friend named Harry Sootehall. The two of them from Buffalo had worked their way around the world. It took them 2 years and 4 months, and they were to return on the Titanic But Howard Irwin, this passenger I'm talking about, this fellow I'm talking about, his girlfriend died at the age of 22, just before they were to go on the Titanic. Howard left a bit early, and Harry Soothall brought his luggage back with him, and when we lost Harry, who was also 25, on the Titanic. And that's how we have Howard Irwin's papers.
And most of these papers reflect what he'd been going through in his life, I assume?
Yes, and where he'd been in Australia and Chicago and in California, and what the state of their relationship was, and how she was a musician in a band with playing a cornet in a vaudeville band, and how she wanted Howard to understand very clearly that she was deeply in love with him and could be trusted while they were away from each other, and hoped that he could be trusted too. And there were personal diaries of how he took music lessons himself, and how he collected materials on his business, which was trimming leather for buggy seats and eventually cars. And what his hobbies were. Like, he was betting on the races in Australia, and what and who he would bet on that day, and his playing cards from Cincinnati, and just the fact that he lost the 8 of hearts, and so he changed the 2 of hearts to an 8 with a pencil, because perhaps, as I did when I was a child, he played crazy 8s or something. Just very personal, close things that made you feel very close to these 2 people. So these 3 people, you feel very close to Harry Soothall as well.
We're being joined by George Tulloch. He's the president of the RMS Titanic. Try to explain to us, if you can, what it is like to go down there to this rusted-out shell. And I've got to leave this to you. Graphically, how can you describe this to us? Of course, we see what the Titanic looks like before, from everything from pictures to even the movie that's out. But what is down there in the ocean? Is it like an Alfred Hitchcock movie? What was it like when you were first there? What were the first thoughts that came in your mind when you saw this thing?
When Princess Diana died this Labor Day weekend, this past year, and we all got a chance to go down in the tunnel, so to speak, and watch this clever French tow truck remove the car she was in from the tunnel. I had that same shivering feeling of what it was like when I first had the chance to see the stern of the Titanic, because the walls were the ceiling, and the floors were the walls, and everything was twisted, and there was this tremendous, horrible sense of what had to be nature's power that was capable of taking this 300-foot piece of the stern that would not fit in Giant Stadium in the Meadowlands, because it would be too big, and yet it could, in 12,000 feet of travel through just water, so distort this piece that the power was beyond human imagination. And yet, as we see in the movie, it was the most beautiful piece of work that we had ever assembled, that had ever moved moments before. And that was such a shock to my mind.
How much lighting, how effective is the lighting that you're able to bring down now to the depths of 20,000 feet?
Usually, a submersible from the mid-'80s onward has had a slowly increasing amount of light added with each new technological jump. The advent in the early 90s of what is called HMI lighting has tremendously helped, and we were able in 1996 to take that off the submersible and collect it into 4 light towers with batteries, and therefore provide external lighting for the submersible to have a larger field of view. But we're just cutting our teeth on deep ocean lighting. at this point in the 20th century.
But there's enough to at least allow you close up, when you're close up to something, to see what it is or what has happened to it.
Prior to these lights that we had, it was much like having a flashlight and going up and staring at a wall in the dark. But with these lights, we've been able to, for example, the engines are, the stern is broken off at the largest piston engines ever made. They're 4.5 stories high. And we've been able to throw enough light on them to be able to see the entire 45 feet of engine next to the next 45-foot high engine, and then back 150 feet. And that's quite a bit of light in what is basically black ink.
How did you were you able to go through the Titanic? Did you have the original design plans and know where all the rooms were and approximately where things were? Or did it matter considering the damage that the vessel went through?
A little bit of all of that, Eliot, in the sense that the ship is in 3 pieces. Popular myth is that it's 2. But it's in 3 similar pieces of about 300 feet. Think of it as the middle, the bow, and the stern. And the middle is a bit shorter because sidewalling has broken off. But it's really with the scientists such as David Livingston from Harlan and Wolff, the naval architect, and the naval architect William Garsky from Gibbs and Cox in Washington, and with the microbiologist Dr. Roy Collymore from Canada, that you start to get a sense, and also historians like Haas and Eaton and Vetterholm, that you get a sense of all the different components, so that what appears to be rust is understood to be bacteria. What is hidden damage, when you bring in scientists like Paul Mathias from Narragansett, Rhode Island, turns out to be penetrable by sonar imaging. And so we can learn where the damage of the cuts were. And naval architects like Garsky and Livingston start to recreate how the ship actually broke apart. And it's only with all of that knowledge, I'm sure Susan Wells might have addressed that earlier with you, we start to compile all that we start to understand a bit more about how the Titanic broke up and what condition it exists in today. So over the decade or so that we've been working, it slowly, piece by piece, much like a jigsaw puzzle, starts to fill itself in.
What is the fascination to this day with the Titanic, generation upon generation?
I think it's a fear of our mortality. I think it's a respect for the courage of our ancestors. I think it's an absolute panic over something as dangerous as the ocean and the darkness. I think it's a love of machines that we have all struggled to build to a maximum level. And I think most importantly, it's our love of each other that can be ended in such a frightful way. And when it's all compiled, it has these fateful mistakes that sound so basically stupid and yet are common, that makes the entire recipe one that is just tauntingly hypnotic.
Obviously, you have thought about it, and in your answer, there's some very humanizing things, and especially what you said about our fear of mortality. The minute you hear about the Titanic, that really races through a person's mind, is that you could be in the most comfortable situation, the most luxurious situation, which it was. This was heaven on earth when they were on that ship.
It was the maximum level of human luxury possible for a broad spectrum of the civilization. It was a slice of life given the life of the rich and famous and lucky. And for 5 days, it was everything you could ever ask for from human civilization.
Except they didn't have Kathy Lee Gifford performing. That would have really... Okay, go ahead.
And then someone said, I think the fact that the lifeboats don't count up right is a bad piece of news because we need them. And everything sounded to seem so stupid. Well, you know, why wasn't the lookout using binoculars? Why are we this far north? Why isn't there enough lifeboats? Why did we leave with a fire on board so everybody was nervous that knew what was going on? Why did we not have a radio operator that worked around the clock on the other ships? And why was our radio operator so busy at 10:30 that he told someone to get off the line about an ice warning? You know, it's simple to say, what the hell are we doing here? But it was too late. I mean, instead, it's like when something like this brutal happened, and yet we haven't lost our senses or our ability to function, we don't care anymore. Our first thought is, well, excuse me, you know, I think I'm going to have to say goodbye to my wife. And I think my children are never going to see me again. And I think I'm afraid that they might not make it. And I don't care about anything else anymore except my family and my friends. And the world is all of a sudden upside down, just like the stern or just like Princess Diana's wreck. And we feel very sorry for ourselves in that moment. And yet we have to also care about little kids that are lost and an older person that can't get in the lifeboat. And yet in our own heart, we want to care about ourselves. And I think that we just find out who we really are at that moment.
George Tulloch joins us. He's been down to the Titanic numerous times. We're on Stein Online and CompuServe Interactive Radio, hosted by AudioNet. Hosted today in CompuServe by the Living History Forum. We'll be back. Stay tuned. George Tulloch, the president of RMS Titanic, a company that does expeditions. They've been down and involved with the salvaging of the Titanic. He's been down there a number of times. I don't know if you have grandchildren or not, or
not
what?
Yet.
Not yet. Oh, okay.
I'm rooting, but I don't have them yet.
Okay, okay, or children.
I do.
And I imagine this must have been very exciting to have Dad going down to the Titanic.
Yes, in fact, they bear a certain responsibility in that we had a family vote 11 years ago of whether or not I'd get involved, and 2 of the 3 children voted that I do. So they're very much interested in the wreck, and Matthew, my youngest son, works with us. So that's he does the Titanic-Online is our website, and he creates that and babysits it and literally lives our website.
So that's www.titanic-online.com.
And yep, and that's his first and primary love in terms of work, and I give him a lot of credit for that. I get a lot of compliments for our team all over the world about our website.
How much in the way of personal possessions, if you had a percentage of, from what you know, has already been taken to the surface? How much is left down there?
Eliot, the debris field, we take a ship that's 900 feet long and break it in 3 pieces at the surface. And then we let it catastrophically shake itself for a 2.5-mile ride down. It ends up a half a mile away from each other in pieces, and it has a debris field that is 1 mile by 1 mile, not unlike an aircraft breaking up, except that this is a 900-foot city of, in this case, 2,200 people, although it could take 3,500 people. This city of people has left such a debris field that what we have done with 5,000 objects seems a minor in scope, other than we're very careful while quantity is not our issue, that the quality of what we have selected is high. But there's a tremendous debris field that will forever dissolve into that seabed.
I am right now at your website. Wanted to pull it up while we were talking, and you have all the events happening surrounding the Titanic. I'm about to pull up an exhibition, and you're right, your son runs this, and it's very, very informative about the Titanic.
He built that all pretty much by himself too. I'm very pleased to say he works with us.
Has there ever been any countries that have such a fascination with this that they've made any offers, like they want to buy the wreck and whatever's there, no matter what's left on there, they'd like to take it over? I don't know if that's knowledge you can share with us or not, or if such a thing has happened.
It's a good question that I've never had asked, Eliot. It's an insightful question. In fact, there are countries that have a voice about the Titanic that's profound. Great Britain, especially Northern Ireland, and in a sense all of Ireland, has a strong voice. The National Maritime Museum in Great Britain, in Greenwich, has been a tremendous supporter and helped an advisor to us and exhibited the wonderful exhibit of the objects in 1994 and 95. They're keen on Belfast as it's reborn through this this bedlam of violence that has started in the beginning of this century, much like the Titanic disaster, and hopefully ends through this century as we do with recovery of the objects. And we have a keenness to New York City, and in one sense, the Titanic was birthed in Belfast, Northern Ireland. It was Ireland at that time, and that's where its reality came from. And New York was, as people call it, a ship of dreams. That's where it was to come, to Ellis Island, and never reached there. And so those two are especially profound locations for us, and have had voices to us about their agreement with that importance for a permanent home.
Well, I imagine that there's probably museums as well that have probably made offers to have some kind of exclusive representation, and because these
certainly that's true. And the important thing, Eliot, with such a tragic collection is that the appropriateness of the exhibit and its location. I'm in no way saying that offers early on from Japan were inappropriate, because Mr. Hisano is a wonderful story. That's a very human story, and I am a tremendous supporter of the survivor from Japan, of Mr. Hisano, that he was very much a normal and healthy man, and the criticism that he endured because he saved himself, I think quite fairly, is unfair. But we thought early on, when we got strong offers from Japan to do it there first, that everything should sequence itself in a certain progression, and so therefore we started actually in Scandinavia, where 1/3 of all the third-class passengers were Scandinavian that were on board the Titanic, and we finished in Europe at that moment with our largest exhibit to that time in Greenwich at the National Maritime Museum, and now we have a large exhibit in Hamburg, Germany, and then we started here in the United States with a large exhibit in the Pyramid in Memphis, Tennessee, and now we're in Florida International Museum, and we're now talking about getting to Japan, to the home of Mr. Hisano. But it has to hit your stomach right that you're doing it. The money to return to investors as a public company for this collection that we have seen fit not to sell and to share with the public, and collect a fee for seeing the objects will come in. And therefore, there's no need to step away, since we're attempting to do it right now that the deep ocean is accessible and we want to set standards, to deviate from that because of money. I mean, everyone sees the work we do, and some critics think the first reaction we have is that we do this for money. We don't. We do this first for history and the preservation of history. We call ourselves a public company preserving history. The heart and instincts of every one of us has a basic mechanism that says, okay, Europe is where they emigrated from, the United States. Okay, we have people from Asia, from Japan, and from China on board. And we'll get to all these homes because that's what these objects should do. And then we'll get to a permanent home or two where scholars and historians and archivists can then collect this story and perhaps others, so that we have meaningful repositories for such a broad and personal tragedy. The public is so gifted to have the Titanic as a universal lesson by these 1,500 that died, because everything seems to be oftentimes so nationalistic. We went to the moon. The British and the French dug a tunnel. This is not the case with Titanic. It is a German story. It is a Russian story. It is a Cuban story. It is a Chilean story. It is a Mexican story. It is everybody's story. And whenever anyone thinks, well, this is an American story, big, rich Americans coming back from leisure in Egypt, and therefore it's an American story. That's not true. It's very much an American story, but it's a Canadian story. This story changed the map of Canada with the railroads when Hayes, the great railroad tycoon, died. This is everybody's story, and therefore no one has a right to consider this, their national story. It belongs to all of us.
I'm going to pull up one last question here from the Living History Forum on CompuServe, and it's a very philosophical question, as morbid as it might seem to you when I read it, but let me do that now. Why is a shipwreck like this considered something that's historical significance and it can be salvaged, as opposed to, say, digging up a mass grave from the early 1900s where people would say, no, we can't do that. We got to leave that alone. Why does this take on a different light?
It's a good question. It may seem morbid, but because we've had some critics that have said this could be considered grave robbing, it's a good question addressing that issue. And the answer, in my mind, that is appropriate to that question is this. Grave robbing and going in and digging up a graveyard of mass bodies may be appropriate if it were the German soldiers that were slaughtered by the Russians during World War II. And the German people wanted to remember their ancestors in a more dignified way, and they chose to do that. I wouldn't either be offended or surprised. However, it's important to remember that everyone was pretty much on the deck with Titanic that night, had a life jacket on, and did not go down with the ship. And if they did, in over 150 dives, no body has ever been seen, and it's a biological fact in the deep ocean. A body is quickly in 2 or 3 years gone, including calcium. Therefore, there aren't any bodies there, and as we do our work, we don't think of it as a grave as much as an artificial reef to a great deal of deep ocean life, animal life. Because below 1,000 feet, there is only animal life in the ocean because the sun is gone. And when you arrive at the site to begin your work, you cry. Whoever you are, you cry. And you cry when you first see the skin of the ocean, the skin of that moving, heaving, breathing ocean, because it's on that skin that these people died and suffered and froze in that frozen skin. Down below is a shipwreck, a metal shipwreck, with a mile by a mile debris field of poignant, delicate, sometimes brutally twisted remnants that prove the reality of that tragedy. And as we reach time, whether it's 1912 or whether it's 2312, when we no longer have a survivor and we don't even have a person alive who knows a survivor sometime during their life. Now we just have no one at all ever connected to this story. The question would be raised, when you found and had an opportunity to recover the Titanic, did you do it? No, because some critics thought it was a mass grave, and therefore the objects around it that we could have recovered before they were lost to the reclamation of the ocean, we left there, would be a brutal indictment to the most important responsibilities that we have, which is to recover those objects that would honor and those objects that would remember our ancestors' struggle for survival in such a meaningful way.
George, this has been great because initially I thought we were just going to talk about, oh yeah, we brought up some gold and we brought up this stuff, but we've had a marvelous philosophically based discussion today on the Titanic and what it all means. It's been pretty deep, and I guess I want to thank you for having joined us today on Stein Online on CompuServe Interactive Radio.
Can I tease you with one last thought, Eliot?
Yes, if you would.
Perhaps part of our love of the Titanic and her passengers is in the sense that even though we won't want to admit that we're capable of it, there's a certain amount of envy that each of us feels for these people having had the ultimate test, having had to give up their lives in that test, but as a result of that test, having been able to prove for all time that they were real men and women of the highest order. And we would only be able to wonder in our lives if we were ever made of that stuff.
Thank you, George. A lot of wisdom today from you. My best to you. Thank you so much, and best of luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you, Eliot. It was a joy to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.